How is China receiving these latest allegations against Huawei and its CFO, Meng Wanzhou? And what impact could it have on the diplomatic rift between Canada and China? Lynette ONG is an associate professor of political science at the University of Toronto, and she joins us now from our Toronto studios. Hi, Professor ONG. Great to see you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland was on Parliament Hill today, kind of downplaying the current state of tensions with China. She says the situation is, quote, challenging, but disagrees that relations are in disarray. What do you think of that?
I think our bilateral relations have hit a very difficult time. Rock bottom, perhaps the most difficult time since the diplomatic ties was re-established in 1970s.
And when you look, so when we're looking forward to trying to change that one way or the other, if that is what's desired, what kind of things are you looking for? For example, there are questions about whether an envoy needs to be appointed right away. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think someone needs to be appointed, someone who appreciates how power dynamics works in Beijing. Perhaps someone who understands the culture and speaks the language would definitely help. But in this day and age, I think the bilateral relationship between China and Canada also very much dependent on U.S. and China relationship. Because we are so close to the U.S., we are an ally of the United States. It's very, very difficult to disentangle between the two sets of relationships.
I'm glad you brought up the U.S. because, of course, that country formally filed an extradition request for Meng Wanzhou, while also yesterday unsealing two big indictments about alleged crimes she and her company, Huawei, have committed. Alleged, I should say. I think I did say, how is China, you're a great gauge of how China responds to these kinds of things. How do you think, first of all, China perceives the actions that were taken yesterday, and how closely associated is Canada with those actions in China, the Chinese government's eyes?
So very serious allegations that DOJ had against Huawei. I think from the Chinese perspective, it's all a conspiracy. Something like economic statecraft, the use of economic policies to achieve foreign policy objective. So the foreign policy objective of the United States here is very much to contain China's growth. So that's from China's perspective. And unfortunately, through that lens, Canada is seen as somehow an instrument of U.S. power.
Do you think, how do you combat that? How do you, if that's the view, the impression that China has now, what does Canada do to combat that, or is that even possible at this time?
I think it is very difficult to do so. It is also very delicate. I think what John McCallum tried to do with the press conference exclusively to the Chinese audience was something along that line. But then again, this is a country of the rule of law. We should fiercely defend that position. We are caught in between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, we need to be defending the rule of law in this country. On the other hand, there needs to be some consideration for what China is thinking, because from China's perspective, this is bullying behavior on the part of the United States, and we are helping with, U.S. do the job.
What do you mean by consideration given to that position?
I think what McCallum was trying to say to the Chinese people is that, I understand your perspective. I think we should somehow get that across to them in order to distance ourselves from the United States to some extent. Not to the extent of compromising the rule of law in this country, but I think to distance ourselves, we need to somehow take marginally independent position vis-a-vis the U.S.
It's interesting because the day before Mr. McCallum's comments came out, we did hear a bit of a shift in tone from Minister Freeland, where she was saying, this is not about a Canadian crime. This did not happen in Canada. There was sort of a more nuanced way of trying to distance. You could see the government was trying to distance itself from whatever was going on in the United States. But then Mr. McCallum took it many steps further. Do you think he did go too far?
I think he went a little bit too far. I think it was a very, very fine line, one that you have to go, 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. And in his case, he probably took too many steps forward, that the government deemed it too risky, too much of a cost, and hence they had to distance themselves from those statements that he has made. But I think that that was kind of the right kind of approach to get ourselves, out of this situation, because we need to be telling both sides that we understand your position, and to be, independent to some extent.
How was the past week, the turmoil here in Canada with Mr. McCallum perceived in China?
Not good. So, I think Mr. McCallum was perceived in Beijing as somewhat of a friend, someone that they could actually trust. I think that is important, because if we want to talk to people, we want to send someone whom they think that they can actually trust, right? I think McCallum was the guy. So when McCallum was fired, all the state-owned media in China were actually very angry about it. I think China Daily said that McCallum has actually spoken the truth, but it has actually fallen on deaf ears on domestic audience.
So combine that with what we heard from the DOJ yesterday and the sort of enormity of that announcement. What do you think it means for the two Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who are detained? How much harder does it get to get them released?
I think it puts them in a more difficult position, more question mark as to how their cases will be handled, because I think it's very difficult to disentangle the trade negotiation going on now, allegations against Huawei, as well as the trial of Meng Wanzhou. I think they should be taken all together into consideration. And I think all of those things are actually not in Canada's favor at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for your perspective, Professor Ong.
Thank you.